The reason we have Helldivers 2 is because that studio had been around for
12 years or something. They've been
a
doing
decade plus, right? And made several other games and didn't go under. The reason that Crashlands 2 is going to get to exist is because
we've never taken investments.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 467 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
This is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's May 10th, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be positive profanity in this show. I think it's a good little spin on it, you know?
Yeah. A positive spin on it even.
Yeah, you know, we use it for emphasis. It's a tool, not a weapon. We're not going to hurt anybody. Well, I don't know. Things are going to get a little interesting this episode.
Yeah, I mean, we'll use it against. We'll use it against the man.
We'll use it appropriately. Yeah. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. Okay, so here's the deal. Everything has exploded in the past week and a half. Gamers around the world are not having a great time because lots of bullshit has gone down. 100% in the name of maximizing shareholder value. Nothing to do with nobody's making any decisions here about what do players want, what do consumers want,
or even what do the devs want who are making stuff. You know, nobody ever asks about the devs, to be honest.
Yeah. And nobody's asking, will this destroy our reputation in the long term? Will people hate us? These questions never come into the minds of the companies we're about to talk about. The question is always, how do we get more profit right now? More money right now. So let's talk about it. All right. So first, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit last week, but we wanted to kind of sit on it for a little while because it was kind of unclear what was happening with Kerbal Space Program 2. So Kerbal Space Program 2 was originally announced, I think, to come out like around 2020.
Yeah, it was a long one.
And then it just didn't. And it wasn't a COVID thing because like it was supposed to come out like around the time that kind of COVID was starting. And they had a really great trailer, very cool trailer.
The trailer was
Kerbal Space Program 2. I had like a tear, like a single tear rolling down my cheek. And I remember thinking, like, man, if they can even do half the shit in this game that they're showing in this trailer, instant buy. I'd pay $200 for that game.
I mean, if they made Kerbal Space Program 1 just the same game, but just everything was a little better, I'd also just
that would also be fine.
Yeah.
So that's not what happened though. So Kerbal Space Program 2 came into early access several years after it was originally supposed to be fully launched. And the early access, this was, 2023, it came into early access. And it turned out that it was incredibly poorly optimized. It was running at like 6 FPS on just like the beefiest gaming rigs in the universe.
It's more like Kerbal Space Program 0.5. They like went back and did a prequel. You know what I mean?
It was like Kerbal Saps Pad,
it
like
also
just
had,
not quite there.
I mean, it had less game than the first
It was missing most of the features that the first game had. You couldn't explore. It was missing most planets. It was missing most rocket parts. It didn't have a science system, which is how you unlock stuff. It was promised to have multiplayer, and it wasn't there, but then they're like, oh, well, it's early access. We're working on all. Like, we have these milestones. We're working on all these features, So even though it came out much, much later, people still bought it, kind of built on hope. But if you look at the Steam charts for the game, the first game is still just absolutely blowing it out of the water because to this day, it's been, I think, just over like a year or something since it's been in early access. And those milestones are just not really moving. They're just not really able to deliver the stuff, which kind of, this kind of speaks to, should have been a clue that they launched it 3 years after it was supposed to launch, and they launched it in an unfinished state. Like, that's a clue that things aren't going too hot on the development side, right?
Well, but it's also one of those like weird scenarios on the player side, right? Because all that's true, and so you don't know when actually it'll be done. There's also the reality that if they're taking this long to make it and if really floundering, then if they can't get a cash infusion and demonstrate that the game would have legs, but also get some money into the system, it's also a lot less likely it actually comes together at all, right? So then as a player, you're put in this horrible situation where it's like, if you buy this broken as fuck, terrible product, then you're not actually guaranteed to get what you want ever. And you certainly aren't getting it right now. But if you don't do it,
you're also definitely not going to get it.
Yeah, then like that might actually be the cause of definitely not getting it later, right? And so this weird hostage situation that players kind of find themselves in for scenarios like this, which feel increasingly common.
Right. Yeah, but this is a little different because Kerbal Space Program is a hit.
Yeah.
Like that game,
that's true.
Sold
it's one
so
of the best
many
games.
copies.
Yeah, it's just stellar.
There's absolutely no reason why they would have needed to go into early access to get the money necessary to develop Kerbal Space Program 2.
Yes.
They've got the resources, they've got the time, they've got everything.
Well, none of that's true because all the resources have to go to shareholders.
Well, this brings us to last week. Yeah.
Yeah. So originally Kerbal Space Program was made by one guy who was working at a marketing company in Mexico. So Squad. And over time, Kerbal Space Program became their dominant source of revenue, and it was like a pet project for this guy. They got him some more resources and some more devs and stuff like that, and they like this just like became what this company did. Like they kind of shifted into being a game studio. Kind of the opposite of what like
mostly happens.
Like Slack or Discord did or whatever. Where like start as a game studio, build a tool, and then work on the tool. Like they did it opposite, which is interesting because like making games is a lot more of a risky thing that a lot more competition than making like a tool that people use, right?
It does make more sense that it started as a side project of one person inside the company, right? Because usually the other direction is that the company needs a tool to develop the game that they're working on, and then that gets spun off. But in this case, it's just somebody was like, I like games, and I've got a cool idea, and I'm making it.
Yeah. People are often making like a productivity tool or something for fun as a side project.
It's a little less frequent.
Yeah, because of scalability issues and all that other shit. So then over time, then Squad, I think it was that Squad rebranded to Private Division as like a new, like as their game studio name. And then
which is simultaneously a really good name and so generic as to be instantly forgettable. Yeah. There's like something about like that combo of words like sounds really like cool and intense, but also just
and you're like, is this like a Black Ops military mercenary group? Is this do they drill for oil? What is this? So over time, then there was like a bunch of weird like business maneuvers and relationships, which ultimately ended up with Intercept Games being like a separate entity from Private Division. And Intercept Games is working on Kerbal Space Program 2. And then Take-Two Interactive, which owns a bunch of stuff, bought Intercept Games, and I'm not sure what their relationship is to Private Division. There's like several, basically like this is now like a bureaucratic hellscape, okay, which explains also partially why nobody's been able to make any fucking games out of this, right? In the past 10 years or whatever. So middle of last week, there was an article that Take-Two shut down Intercept Games. They just closed the whole thing. As far as anybody knew, Intercept Games was the group of people working on Kerbal Space Program 2. So Kerbal Space Program 2 it's an early access. There's all these promises, right? So then Private Division comes out and they're like, don't worry, Kerbal Space Program 2 development will continue on schedule as normal.
I like
which already wasn't happening. And so all the players are like, the fuck? Like, what is this?
Is anybody working on it now?
Is this just a scam now? Is that what's happening? Is this just a flat out just keep lying to players to sell copies on hope and then eventually just be like, never mind, and then delist it?
It is weird because if you're like,
the plan?
If you're like, we shut down the studio that makes this game that is already behind schedule all in all.
Yeah, but don't worry, that won't change anything. What?
Yeah.
How? What magic? And I mean, to be fair, that might be true in the sense that if barely anything was happening in the game, then maybe that's just where it's going. Lots of review bombs and
when this news came out, I had actually completely forgotten that Kerbal Space Program 2 launched in early access. Like to me, it was still just a game that had never come out, and And as far as I was concerned, like
it
never
is
was going
a
to.
game that's never come
But I mean,
out.
but it's available. Like I could have bought it, and I went through the whole process. So a year or whatever ago that was, where I was like, oh, should I buy it? Because I love Kerbal Space Program, but it's not a game yet, and so I was like, oh, so at the time I was like, oh, wait, but the vibe about it, like it was such a. They took something that I was so excited about with like the trailer for Kerbal Space Program 2. That it was able to have a whole ass early access launch, and I was able to forget that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
It's like season 8 of Game of Thrones, Adam. It's like it erases,
which I intentionally never watched for exactly that reason. Yeah, it's like
it's like that. It's like the live action Avatar remake. It's like the Halo show, right? It's like just don't fuck it up. Right? Like just don't get too proud. Take the source material and just do it justice, right? And expand upon it, but like respect where it's coming from and all that. And man, that is not what happened at all. No. Right? It just did not go well.
But the news just continued, right? And this is why it's been like the weirdest shitstorm of week, because right after this, then Sony,
I think like a couple days. It was like Friday, I think.
Yeah. Sony comes out and they're like, P.S. Everyone who's been playing that game that's been huge called Helldivers, which has been,
Helldivers 2,
which has been just like one of the biggest games. And it's still got just a tremendous amount of people playing it because it's a live service ongoing game. They're like, anybody who bought it on Steam, you are going to have to now add a PSN, a PlayStation Network account. So keep in mind, Sony owns PlayStation. They make PlayStations. Helldivers 2 is published as part of with Sony as a partnership thing there. So Sony can do this, right? It's part of the agreement.
Yeah. So Sony didn't make Helldivers 2. Arrowhead Games did. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Sony, I don't know if they own Arrowhead or if they
I don't think they just own it. I think they
are the publisher.
Publishing or some development.
So contractually they hold a lot of power.
Well, and as we know from having almost worked with Sony and then deciding not to, they
like to throw their weight around.
They do not fuck around when it comes to contracts, and they will take everything. So it's not a surprise that their relationship made it.
They fuck around in the way of like a school bully who takes your lunch and shoves you into a locker. Like that's kind of their approach to business negotiations. In our experience,
it's their way or the highway. There's no room for negotiation.
Yeah. So what ended up happening then is, as you might expect, everyone who's on Steam, all the Steam players are like, "Fuck this." No, which is
like I don't have a PlayStation. I don't have.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't want to fucking sell.
Well, there is a two-parter here, right? Because there's the subset of people who are just like who are always mad about third-party accounts, right?
Well, this is why I'll get into because it's like
I don't like. I think that's a weird thing to get up.
So I made an account for Baldur's Gate.
Yep.
Like I made a Larian account, right? It's like I don't care. I don't care about making a third-party account. People do it all the time.
That's the thing. It's like it does only take like 2 minutes to make a PlayStation account. It's actually very easy, right? But there's a huge wrinkle in that whole thing, because I agree that like people are generally angry when you ask them to do stuff if they've been
just anything at all, really.
So that's kind of like, okay, yeah, you're going to get some of that. But the thing that blew my mind was that like what the problem actually is that PSN accounts don't exist. You cannot get one if you're in certain countries. Like you cannot.
Yeah, that's where the real problem comes. And it's not. And when you say certain, you mean 170 countries and territories.
Most countries, actually, yeah.
Most countries.
And Helldivers, too, has been selling on Steam in, you guessed it,
all of them.
Most countries.
It's everywhere.
Steam operates everywhere, even places it's not supposed to,
Yeah.
Steam doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah. So I don't know who missed this, like, fact in the mix there, but...
my understanding from, like, reading about the people trying to find out exactly how this unfolded was that Sony was, because as we would expect, Sony required them to use PSN Network for login on Steam, right? But that at the time that they were supposed to be launching, they had not figured out the technical details of making that work yet. And so they somebody decided to go ahead and launch anyway, which is one thing. Like to me, like that's okay, fine, that makes sense. But that also means that the people involved though weren't like, but because you can on Steam, you can say like the game isn't available in these regions, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So, somebody involved, they could have still planned enough for it. They still could have announced the time and said like, hey, we're not requiring PSN accounts yet, but we're going to. That could have been part of the launch stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, they just went ahead and started selling it everywhere, knowing that the PSN thing was going to come up eventually, right?
Mm-hmm. But the thing that intrigues me about it is that they may not have known, because I wouldn't guess that you can't make a fucking PlayStation account just wherever you are. That's not.
Yeah, well, because the Arrowhead devs are not Sony. They don't know the legal intricacies.
But the people
of
they
the PlayStation
interact
network
with at Sony, who allowed them to go forward without the PSN accounts, right,
are lawyers and also don't.
Yeah, it's like it would be surprising to me if the people that were involved in making the decisions just literally didn't know.
Yeah, and that'd be my guess.
It would
sounds like exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also wouldn't be that surprising so there's a lot of ways that this could kind of not be a surprise. The stupid thing, the idiotic, completely just mind-numbingly stupid thing was that months after launch, Sony comes out and says, hey, now we're going to make this change. And there's something to be said.
They couldn't just leave it alone.
Yeah,
they couldn't just leave it alone.
And there's a real possibility that had that actually been a requirement at launch, because again, Steam gamers are allergic to third-party accounts. Like they have an outsized reaction.
It's a real medical condition.
It's a very outsized reaction. And so there's a good chance that if at launch, if that was a requirement, and especially then if people in 170 places couldn't actually do it, that the game would have met the same level of success as like the original, of where it's like it's a successful game, but it's still a niche kind of a title and stuff.
I mean, go figure. If you constrain your market and cut out almost all of the countries, you sell fewer copies.
So
that happens.
And so the whole thing feels like a rug pull, even if they weren't going to have to like take it out of people's libraries.
So we actually haven't hit on what the actual consequence of this is for those players, right? Because like what that means then is if you're required to have a PlayStation account to even play this game on Steam, and you've bought the game on Steam in one of these countries, once that policy goes into place, you will just no longer be able to play the game that you bought, right? Which that's where it's like, okay, sure. If people are going to be grumbly about signing up for an account, that's one thing, right? Mm-hmm. But if you've sold them something and then just revoked access to it, like 5 or 6 months later, that's
different level of fuckery, right? And I think on top of that, you have it's very easy on the dev side to be essentially saying like, okay, there are things that we need to do for a business case thing, or even for a design purpose that we know some subset of sort of like gamers, quote unquote, are going to be kind of loud or angry about, right, in some capacity. But essentially, in order for us to make the game at all, or whatever else in order for us to deliver on what we want to deliver here, we have to do it. Like it's sort of like requiring a login just so you can have cross-play stuff or cross-save accounts, like the stuff that we have to do, right? Some people are going to be a little like potentially salty about that, but you're like, well, I mean, it's not.
And the thing is,
okay.
like Crashlands 2 for mobile, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's already the case that mobile stores are going to be restricted in certain countries, but also, we're working with Netflix, mm-hmm. and there's also going to be places where people can't get Netflix accounts, mm-hmm. right? Which is a bummer, but also it's not a rug pull.
It's not a rug pull. And also it's
like that from day one. And it's something we can expand over time. This is like people can gain access to this stuff over time as those services expand, or as other versions of the game come out on different platforms or whatever. But if you're selling the game
and then
later locking it down, it's just
So
what is happening?
So as expected, then one, the Helldivers community is the whole thing is it's a unified army, literally, of players, right?
From an RP perspective, the community for Helldivers 2 is the most prepared for a situation like this. Because they spend all day
single-minded and in sync with each other.
Oh, it's great. It's great. Yeah. So they basically said like, okay, there's a new major order, which is usually what happens every couple of days in the game, which is like, okay, now we're taking this plan over. New major order, which is a review bomb on Steam, which they fucking did. I mean, if you look at that, you go look at the graph because Steam shows a graph. Oh my God, it is.
What did it get? Like 400,000 negative reviews in like a weekend?
The biggest review bomb ever?
Honestly, it might fucking be because it was crazy.
It is.
Absolutely.
I had a funny thought where I was looking at those and I was like, man, how many developers would kill to have that many reviews.
I know, right?
Right? Like the number of negative reviews they got far exceeds how many copies almost any game could hope to sell in its lifetime.
Yeah. So it's an impressive feat, frankly, kind of across the board.
It's so great.
But caught in the crossfire of this, of course, is like, again, there's a bunch of aspects of like mismanagement of communications or whatever else, sure, that you can throw out. But again, to Adam's point from earlier, the degree to which we even know how much of this is known to various parties before it happens is actually kind of hard to, like, I couldn't possibly blame like the Arrowhead devs because I don't know the extent to which even they knew that Sony was going to do this. But also,
this wasn't something that they would have, like, no developer in the universe ever goes, hey, you know what we should really do? Integrate this platform's login system.
Yeah, absolutely not. That's true.
No developer ever wants to do that. Absolutely. Like ourselves included. Like, we would rather just use our own cloud system and login system, right? And like, it's just extra work that we would have to do. Like, if we hook up like Steam cloud saving and Steam login, right? Like, that's something that benefits Steam.
Yes.
But like, we don't get anything from that. Right. And so in this case, like, what does Arrowhead gain and what do the players gain by adding this PlayStation account linking thing? Nothing. Nobody gets anything from this.
And it's why
Sony
it's so
does,
stupid
right?
is, what does PlayStation gain?
Email addresses.
They don't
For
need
PC,
They just get email addresses.
Yeah.
They don't need
I don't know.
Sony's been launching more and more titles on PC. So to me, it's like, that to me is what they're using it for. They're saying, here's this huge audience of PC players who are playing a shooter, right? We are bringing, I mean, they brought like Horizon Zero Dawn, they brought God of War over, like they brought a lot of stuff over, and their plan is to basically do more of that in the future too, right? So to me, it is them doing that marketing strategy. But instead of doing it, to me, the smart way of just saying, hey, now you can link your PlayStation account, and we'll give you some stuff, which is the easy way to do it. The best way to do it usually, or even like let you do, I don't know, some cross save shit or some other bullshit, right? Instead, they're like, everybody's
have a
forced
fucking
to.
newsletter sign up, you know?
Yeah,
but also, it's a game with an in-game fake currency economy for you to buy upgrades
pay
and
me.
stuff, right?
Pay me fake money.
Give people some fake money, and they'll give you their email address, and they won't even be
there's a thousand positive ways this could have been done.
Yeah,
and they went the route of Unity, right? Where they just like
did the stupidest thing possible.
Yeah. And it's kind of that antagonistic viewpoint that it seems like so many large companies are starting to take, which is like, your customers are this annoying thing you have to deal with to get their money. Yeah. Right? Like all you really want is the pile of money behind the customer, and you'll do anything to that customer to get past them and get that money. Right. And it's like, or even if it's just something as mundane as like trying to get their email address so you can either, sell it to a third party, use it to start accumulating, like some kind of an email thing so that you can use that as another marketing tool or whatever, right? But it's like, at no point is this, hey, how do we deliver a good experience for our players and make them want to come back? Yeah. This is just never.
And again, like there is always that case of like, you as a business are doing your business thing, you need to survive, right? But the fact that it's just a design problem to be like, how do we do that and make people happy? That's it. It's not that hard. It's like, that's the constraint, right? And then you think
I think that's the problem is your framing of it is wrong. It's not that hard to survive as a business and make players happy. It is impossible to grow infinitely as a business and make players
happy. Which I think
is,
frankly, to our next, well, I guess I'll wrap that up, which is that Helldivers 2, then Sony basically said, oh, sorry, we're still learning how to do PC games.
They're like, there was no way for us to predict this.
Well, my favorite part is
there's a bit of truth there, right? In the sense that, like, if you're used to being in your absolutely locked down walled garden ecosystem where you get to do whatever the fuck you want to your players, and they don't have a way. They don't have a way to actually complain to you. Players don't have a voice in that ecosystem, right? So this is true of any like lockdown thing. Do they even have reviews in PlayStation on games? Like, I don't even know if that's a thing.
I actually don't know.
But players are just used to like, we get whatever Sony gives us, and that's the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So if that is the model that you're steeped in, and then you come to the anarchic chaos of PC gaming, right? Yeah. I can see how you actually wouldn't even. I could see if like, you don't have the right people at the table. I could see you being like, this isn't a big deal, and just
we do this all the time.
Yeah, the thing is, Adam, you're right. Like, just don't have the resources or the time
Yeah.
to look into questions.
Is there
like
nobody
this.
on their team
there's
who's
simply,
like a PC fucking?
No, there's simply no way to have found this out.
But it is the hilarious
but they're
thing,
still
is
learning.
You could
so-
take any PC player, developer or not. You could take any of them and just ask them like, "Hey, what would happen?"
Let me
if
run
we
this
did
by
this?
you real
And they
quick.
would have the answer.
Yep.
They'd be like, "Ooh, I would hate that."
Yeah. But so
Like, oh.
they basically apologized and said, okay, we're not going to do that. Right. So yay. Good job. Helldivers community, banded together, blew up the game. Caught in the crossfire, of course, is literally the developers of the game who get all sorts of terrible stuff happening to them, death threats, whatever. The community, I think one of the community managers kind of had a moment and then like maybe got fired or something.
Yeah,
So
that
there's all
community
sorts of
manager a community manager was part of encouraging players to review bomb their own game, and which honestly, like that person managed the fuck out of that community.
They did, yeah.
I will say they did their job.
It's a managed democracy.
Yeah.
So, but I think then that pivots over to this next piece, which again, the shitstorm just continues this week. So Microsoft, which recently bought Activision Blizzard King for essentially $70 billion in like the largest merger, I think, fucking like ever or something.
So big.
They blew up a handful of studios. So
They just shut them down. Because they own a lot more studios than that, right?
Yeah.
They've acquired a lot over
But
the
it
years.
was interesting because they did blow them up. They didn't sell them. They
correct.
They just dropped a nuke right on them.
just-
So they have shut down a handful of studios, including weirdly ones that have a great track record of doing really good stuff, even like in very recent memory. So the studio Tango Gameworks behind Hi-Fi Rush, which was a game that was like a surprise hit on Xbox last year, won a bunch of awards, won a BAFTA for fuck's sake, like won a bunch of stuff. They just shut that studio down. They're working on a sequel right now. They just shut it down. They shut
Just
down
gone.
Arcane in Austin, which is working on a new giant like sim. They do like those kind of fun action sim games. Shut that one down. Like just no. The question is like everyone's like, what? Why? So what do you have to do to be safe in this context if you can literally have released last year a hit that won a bunch of awards and then they're just like, but get fucked though, and then send you packing? Like what? What is happening?
Well,
right?
I mean,
The growth wasn't infinite enough. Was the problem?
well, but there's
sounds
also,
like it.
but also if you think about like, this is a pipeline. This is Xbox basically saying we bought these studios as a means of sort of like supporting them and getting good content into Xbox Game Pass and stuff like that, right? There are lots and lots of game studios out there making games, trying to get their games into Xbox Game Pass. And Microsoft does not retain those people as employees on payroll. They don't own those companies. They don't have to manage them or administer them or anything. And if that's the case, then because also like Game Pass subscriber numbers are starting to plateau, and there's all these other things where it's likely that Microsoft is just looking going forward to offer up less money for studios putting things into Xbox Game Pass.
They already have been. We know that.
Because like as a game studio ourselves, like if we're trying to put something into Xbox Game Pass, that's not the only thing we're doing. That's going to be a portion of the revenue for that game, not all of it, right? And so in the case of like for Microsoft literally owning the studio and having to employ those people, they're covering the cost of all that development. And I don't know if those studios are also releasing stuff onto other platforms or if they're specifically meant for Game Pass. But it's essentially just like a cost management measure, because if they could say like, oh, well, if an external company, is only going to use Game Pass for a portion of their revenue, then we can give them a much lower amount of money, and then they can figure out how to pay their employees through a bunch of other diversified, revenue streams.
Well, actually,
And so
I mean, you could also just decide they don't care if the company, because I think more realistically, they'll just say, we'll pay them as little as we can, which does, and like you're saying, then wouldn't have to be the entire cost of making the game, right? We'll pay them as little as we can, and we don't care if they fold as a company. I think realistically, it's not, I don't think
there's always
the
more
math-
games coming out. Probably.
Yeah, I don't think the math they're doing is like, oh, they'll be able to make up the rest of the money elsewhere. They're just saying, we don't give a shit.
They don't make decisions based
No,
on
it's not about they will be able to.
right?
It's just that like, yeah, we don't care about these people, and there are so many games coming out, and so many games that want to get into Game Pass that we can just invest less in it and still get good games, right? So if they can do that, they don't need to have these. They just don't need to have these studios.
Yeah, but it is so,
Like from a numbers
But
perspective.
it's just weird.
Right?
Like the one,
It's so
the ones
short-sighted.
the ones to cut too, because it's like
yeah.
you're not cutting ones where you're like, we haven't seen a game out of this team, or it's like, oh, this is like one of those almost like Bonfire Studios, right? Where it's like one of those teams that like costs a shitload of money because it's all these like fancy, long time.
Oh, did they ever
industry
launch
experts.
anything?
No, I haven't heard anything about that. So like that's what I'm saying. Like there's most of these studios where there's a bunch of money pouring in every year, but nothing has happened because, you know, it's like the studio hasn't actually managed to ship anything. It's not even those that you're talking about. You're talking about studios that have shipped
Proven
stuff.
studios.
Yeah. Or even shipped award-winning stuff recently.
Yeah, and it is.
And then,
I mean,
like what?
it is. Yeah, it's just stupid. But it is really expensive to run a game studio because it's expensive to run a company because people cost a lot of money, right? So it is also true with all of this, that all of this stuff is really expensive. But
they paid $70 billion to get off.
but they've got the money to do it, and they're closing things that are profitable. Again, just not apparently profitable enough. But the whole idea of the entertainment industry, of all parts of it, games, movies, books, whatever, right, is that it's a random process. You have to invest in large numbers. You invest in your portfolio with the idea being that most things in the portfolio actually lose money. They don't make a profit at all. But by investing in the portfolio, you get a large bank of content. You get the few big winners that basically subsidize the rest.
It's sort of like the Helldivers thing, right?
lineup.
It's like the sheer amount of money that Helldivers 2 has made, right? Like I said, let's talk about the reviews, right? Is like if you took all the random indie devs, you know, like in that bracket who were making stuff, and some of them net out a little bit positive, some a little some of them crash, right? But then you put that fucking thing in there, and it's like, yeah, you got the same thing happening, right? Where overall, it's a hit-driven business. That's the short of it. So you
need to have the room.
Right?
But you need to have the room to have the hits. Like this is why I get so mad about the games industry and how short-sighted it is. And I think actually just modern entertainment industry,
business,
which is all because it's all tech and business driven. I mean, it's always been business driven, right? But the core model historically has always been you have a portfolio that you're trying to manage where you're trying to guess what the winners will be, right? Yeah, but you're investing in lots of things for two reasons. One is because you don't know which one is going to be the hit, right? But also because for the long-term success of your company as the entity that basically gets titles out there and sells them to people, right, requires that you have things that can be successful constantly coming in. And if you're not subsidizing the costs of the flops, because when you're operating on a single, like on our scale, where you're making one game at a time, then a single flop
you could ever do.
It nukes the company and it's gone forever. It's just gone. So the people who were involved in that process, they don't find other jobs. And if they do, they might not be running it. It's like if we lost Butterscotch, right? If we lost it, that probably means we can't make a new game studio because otherwise we would have kept Butterscotch around, right?
Yep.
So now either we just go do something else and never make games again, or we get absorbed into some other entity and we don't make the kinds of games we used to make. In all cases, if the company goes down, then the things that company would have made in perpetuity
will never be seen.
They'll never be seen
In the long run, yeah. Where are you building?
in the long run. Yeah. So when companies are doing this short-sighted thing where they're trying to only pick the winners, pick the things that they think are going to be 10x.
Winners that are 10x, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And everything else, even if it actually is successful, is not successful enough, then all they're going to basically be doing is making it so that 5 and 10 years from now, we only have the huge studios making the huge live service games, and that's it, because everybody else had to get absorbed into that or go.
But I think importantly too,
leave the market.
As we've seen time and time again now with newly launched live service titles in the last 5-10 years, it's not like just making the game fucking huge and expensive makes it sell more copies. It's just not happening, right? Like a lot of the times you'll see they're just more expensive flops. And so to me, it's the most short-sighted thing about it is that if you look at studios like Arrowhead or like Larian, made Baldur's Gate, what you're seeing there, and do you remember Magicka? We played the shit out of Magicka.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Magicka.
Arrowhead made Magicka.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So
they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing. And the thing is, like, that was a smaller, again, a niche game. But again, they had like the frantic inputting of keys, right? Where you're putting your spells together and shit. Mm-hmm. Someone was basically looking at kind of their history as they were building up to Helldivers 2. And what you can see is that like there's something kind of nascent in their design methodology, right?
Yeah.
And that what they're trying to do that is slowly being improved on and iterated on and built upon. And then if you give them enough time to fucking cook, then at some point
really good stuff.
It really gets
The
crystallized.
reason we have
Larry, right?
Helldivers 2 is because that studio had been around for
It's like 12 years or something. They've been
a
doing
decade plus, right? And made several other games and didn't go under. The reason that Crashlands 2 is going to get to exist is because
we've never taken investments.
and because like we've been around long enough to have made Tau Fight of the Gods of all things, right? Back in like 2012.
And like where does this all lead for us, in the next 10 years? I don't know. I think it's the same thing. It's what makes me excited looking at like Larian and Helldivers is like if you told me the Magicka team would in 10 fucking years release literally like the biggest thing and it would be a Starship Troopers fucking simulator basically, I'd be like, no way.
Yeah, no way.
I don't understand how the DNA is going to get there, but you can.
If you told me back in 2012 that we would be making a game like Crashlands 2,
yeah, I'd be like in your fucking dreams. I'm stuck in like tiny mobile game land. Okay, Yeah. So but you don't know where this is going to go. But you just know that if you can keep the teams together, right, and if they have a track record of making stuff people like, right, it doesn't have to be that every single fucking person likes.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to even be a financial success necessarily, as long as there's some way to subsidize it because again, you're gambling over time. I think that the short sightedness is companies treat this as if they're gambling on individual titles, but what they're actually gambling on is the titles and the future titles that will come from those same studios.
Yes.
And if they only think they're gambling on individual games, then that short-sightedness makes it so that they don't subsidize the right things to give the opportunity for a huge success.
Well, it's like you bought a portfolio, but then you don't treat it like a portfolio. Essentially, what that means to me. Like
it's a portfolio over time instead of saying like, oh, we're gonna invest in these 10 different games right now, right? Like if you invest in one team over a long period of time, then you're still investing in 10 games. It's just every game is better than the last one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Until eventually at some point it's like, okay, because you're investing in talent and growth, right? Which honestly, I mean, this is something we kind of talked about in the past, which is as soon as a company gets bought, it is now an investment. It's like a stock.
It's a spreadsheet.
Or it's like,
item.
It's just a number in a spreadsheet now that somebody can just delete from that spreadsheet at some point and be like, well, we're done with that.
They just don't like the numbers they're looking at. So.
Yeah. Because like if you yourself are, you're the Hi-Fi Rush studio, right? You would never go, wow, our game did great, but it could have made more money. All right, well, let's shut it down. All right, let's all go home, fire. All right, we're all firing ourselves. We're going to get the fuck out of here. Yeah. Nobody would ever do that.
Yeah, and they're making a fucking sequel,
okay, how do we...
Like they were in the midst of a sequel, right?
Yeah. Why wouldn't they? Yeah. If the first one did well. And so it's as soon as you invite in that investor control, it's over. Like you just don't realize you're just sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, again, to some degree, we're in a lucky quote unquote position. But to some degree, depending on the project size, depending on what you're where you're coming into a project like this, right? It's not necessarily the case that you can operate without investment, right? Or that you can operate at all without some other people involved most of the time.
Well, an investment isn't inherently bad. It depends on what the strings are that are attached to the investment.
Yeah. If somebody was like, oh, we'll buy like a 30% stake in Butterscotch, right? Then if we were to even consider that, we would have extremely specific terms about control and deliverables and expectations, right? And essentially, like the terms would be, we're still going to do exactly what we do right now, and you get zero input. Yeah, like that would be, and you just trust, right? Because like we've been here for fucking 12 years, making games, and we're doing better every time. And sometimes things don't pan out, but we learn so much from those that then we can capitalize on that with the next title, right? Mm-hmm. And if some fuckwit keeps coming in every 3 months for a quarterly meeting, like banging on some like fucking accounting spreadsheets and yelling at us about quarterly earnings, it's like, no, like we literally cannot operate that way. That's not how you make the stuff that we make. So anyways, it's been a hell of a week
it's a hell of a week on top of a hell of a year.
Layoffs in the game space is rough right now.
Almost every podcast episode this year we've just like, before we record, we discuss like what's been going on in the industry, what's been going on in the studio, like what do we want to talk about in the episode? And almost every week it's, oh, well, that studio got shut down.
Yeah.
Oh, this like 500 people got laid off in Europe from Sony.
And we don't
you
talk
know,
about
like,
most of it because that's all we would be talking about if we,
yeah,
you know.
it's
hard to get money right now too. You know?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what happens the next 5 years with, because especially because games take so long to make.
Yeah.
That the consequences of business decisions don't get seen until 5 years later, right? But if they're happening at scale, so when those decisions are being made at the level of Microsoft and Sony and Apple and Google, right? When they're the ones who are pivoting some business strategy, the impact they have on the whole industry, on literally thousands of other companies and tens of thousands of people, is enormous, but it's not actually seen.
It's about, I think it's a year or two where you're like,
it's at least a few years until you see
it.
it. And then you start to see it, but then like the amount that you see grows, right? For another few years until whatever the next business decision that was made still 5 years ago, but now 2 years after the other decision or whatever, right? Start to catch up. And so we're always seeing these things on a lag. So stuff that like we're looking at this right now, we're like, obviously this is stupid and short-sighted. It's going to result in a less of an ability for indies to stick around long enough to make hits, right? On the other hand, we're seeing this weird amount of like random indie hits, right? Like for the past like
every
year,
month,
right?
every month there's been one.
Every month there's like some new indie hit, and so it might be that what these big companies are looking at is they're like, well, we can just safely rely on the fact that a random game can just come out of nowhere and make fuckloads of money, so that we just don't have to invest at all, and the public will still get their games, right? And that might actually turn out to be true enough when we're operating at scale, that like the fact that all this stuff is true might mean that we can that we can still get away with having just fewer and fewer long-lived studios over time.
Yeah, but like I don't know why. Like if I was a Microsoft or a Google or whatever, like I don't know why you would ever acquire a game studio.
Yeah.
Like realistically, in terms of the way that jives with your business goals, or like the only time I could maybe see it is if you're like trying to do a Stadia.
Yeah.
Right. Which is like, hey, we've got this new platform that nobody in their right mind would develop for because there's nothing on it and it's a new tech that isn't compatible with anything that exists. So in order to get it off the ground, we need to actually like make the games for it ourselves as a proof of concept. But if you're making, if you're a company that operates on Android or iOS, or if you are Google, you're Apple, you're Microsoft, like I just don't know why you would buy a game studio.
Yeah, I mean the smartest.
I just don't know why you do.
Yeah, the smartest move is to sit in that gatekeeper position and just take 30% of all revenue, right? Which they're already doing.
Yeah, but let them sort out their own finances. You just skim off the top.
But the actually smart move is to only do that, but do it with a progressive store cut policy, right? So that. Which Apple and Google do have now. Nobody else does yet, but Apple and Google both.
Steam has a regressive one. The more money you make on Steam, the less you pay Steam.
Yeah, because on Apple and Google right now, as if you're making until you hit $1 million in a given year, at least that's what it was last I knew, then your cut is 15%, and then it jumps to 30 after $1 million, right? Which
to me you have to apply for. You have to apply it like an automatic.
Yeah, it's. Or at least on Apple, I think Google might do it automatically. I can't remember, but yeah, they're still being butts about it because they can, right? Because it should just be automatic. But that's actually the perfect business model, because in the short term, you don't have any costs because everybody else is absorbing their own costs. Yeah, you're still, and they're the ones gambling because you get to take everybody's money, whether they're successful or not. So you get the money from the successes, right? But in the long term, you also win. Because if you reduce your cut a little bit, then
you increase the number of chances people have, right?
Because you increase the longevity of all the smaller studios to give them the chance to become those bigger studios that are making more than $1 million a year for you, right? And so, like, Seth, I agree. Like, anything else seems stupid if you're already the gatekeeper.
Yeah. Like if there's a team of 10 people who spends 2 years making a game, right? And that's going to cost them some, hundreds of thousands of dollars at least, if not millions. Because paying 10 people and salaries and taxes and equipment and potentially office space if you're making it in person, like shit, those numbers really add up, right? So you're going to spend all that money with your studio. And then you may launch your game onto the App Store or something, and it might make $5,000, right? That happens all the time. Well, if you're Apple and you didn't spend any money investing in this company, hey, you just get to skip a 30% off of that, right? That's just a free couple $1,000 for you. You don't have to do shit, right? And like that studio, like they're in trouble, but you lose nothing as the platform, right?
But also,
So,
if you were only charging them, if you're only charging them 15%, and then they were a flop, you also didn't lose anything by not charging them 30%, right? And so the benefit, I think, but if you take that and you couple it with then like an actual publisher model where you do investments into game studios, where you're buying them, but where you're saying, I want to subsidize this team because I want to increase their chance of survival because I think they can do good stuff, right? And to me, like that's if you take all of those things, like that's actually the perfect model on the gatekeeper / publisher side. Is if you already just get to have the money, then then still subsidized on a lower
just hang
end.
out and just
hang out, right? But you're trying to make sure that you're generating hits in the long run, because that's actually where all the money comes from. Yes. On the publisher and gatekeeper side is from.
I think it's actually less about that. It's more about locking down the hits. Like if you're a platform and you see a game that you think is going to be great, right? And you're like, I want to make sure that game is on my platform and is optimized for it and supports all of the things. Like I want this game to make my platform look good, right? Or even be an exclusive, right? So that like people have to come to my platform. Like those are the reasons to do that. But it still doesn't, like you're saying, it doesn't make sense to buy the whole ass studio if you want that. Just pay them like some development services, like subsidize it for that project. And that's all you need to do. So, I mean, like, it's weird to me that all these studios are getting shut down. The weirder thing to me is that they were purchased in the first place. I don't really know why that's happening.
Well, I mean, the original purchases are happening not by the gatekeepers, right? Because like all the original purchases, like Embracer, because Embracer Group they're not running a platform where they just get to take 30%, right? They're giving the game to a platform that takes 30%, right? So normally all these mergers and acquisitions are happening between holding companies and other game companies and stuff, right? That then have to figure out how to convert that stuff into cash. It's basically like the weird thing is when Microsoft, and like you don't see like Google doesn't buy game companies, Apple doesn't buy game companies.
They started some with Stadia,
That's true.
They did a little bit with that. But I think Netflix for Google Play though, but for Google Play, they're not buying game studios, right?
I mean, App Store's not buying shit.
Yeah, they're not.
Those are framed not as gaming platforms. Those are like you can get games on them, right? But Xbox isn't really like it was games first. And like now you can get like Netflix on Xbox and watch movies on it and stuff like that.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? Because Xbox and PlayStation both historically and today do buy game studios, right? Mm-hmm. But they mostly do that to lock down exclusivity. Like that's actually why they're doing it. The ones that are otherwise, and so Xbox or Microsoft inherited a bunch of companies because of their big recent purchases where their goal was to get exclusivity over certain products, right? And because all these companies own 10 other companies who own 10 other companies and so on, right? They just kind of incidentally get a bunch of other companies too.
Was it like 70 studios or something crazy? Like that's a huge, it's a crazy amount of product, which I guess, I mean, just from a sheer management standpoint, if you're centralizing, you're trying to centralize essentially planning across all that and in some kind of capacity.
Oh, that's a lot. Yeah.
I don't know how.
Yeah, I can see not one of those studios. Again, I don't really see closing them. But the main reason that people close a studio, though, if it's owned by a bigger company, is because they want the resources, usually the people, that the company has, but don't want those things going towards that particular project, that company, basically.
Yeah, we're more moving stuff around more so than like destroying.
Yeah. And so you just close the company because like you don't care about that company, but you want the people out of there. So that's why you don't sell
the IP
or the IP. Because if you sell the company, then the people and its IP are gone from you, right? But if you close it, then you still own all the IP. You still you still get to take all the royalties that the games are making if they're already out. You still get all of that stuff. And you also potentially get to then keep the people, depending on what the deal was, right? And move them to other projects that you are, for whatever reason, think are more important. Because the other part about all this too is that, game developers and people who make this stuff are not interchangeable cogs.
I think that's the wildest part.
They're also a limited resource.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of Hi-Fi Rush, just is the weirdest one. Makes them like you have a team that is still the same team, right? That made the first.
The part that I don't know
just,
is what happened to that team. Are they just
everybody got laid off?
so okay?
They
So it
didn't
was
reabsorb them.
actually they closed the studio and fired. It wasn't that they moved people around to other.
Yeah, no.
parts of
My
the
understanding is that they have. It's just straight up everyone is laid off.
Yeah, so that one I don't get because you're better off just being like, hey, keep your company, and then just divesting, you know? Because like you're not.
I don't know. I mean,
Like it just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, one of my first like forays into learning about the games industry was in Iowa City in 2010. I was starting law school and I was starting to learn how to make games as well at the same time. And there was Mad Catz studio who made Guitar Hero in Iowa City. And like a couple of months before I started law school, that studio, like the people showed up to work one day and the doors were locked and they were all just handed a severance package and told to go home. Like that. And that was like that studio had been purchased by somebody else who wanted the Guitar Hero IP, right? And they just fired everybody and shut down the office. And so like I was reaching out in Iowa City trying to find people who knew stuff about the games industry. And the only people in Iowa City who knew stuff about the games industry were people who had just gone through this, right? And so I talked to several people that year trying to learn more about what it was like. And they were all just like, man, this is fucked. So like it's kind of always been like this, you know, but I think now just with the scale of just how many, you know, how popular games are nowadays, how many studios there are. Like
it's the combination of it's who's saying what at what time paired with layoffs, because you have also like apparently like Phil Spencer had visited the Hi-Fi Rush studio in September and like taking pictures with the whole team, you know, and they talked about how incredibly excited they were about it and how grateful they were to have the project.
And Microsoft posted quarterly earnings showing fuckloads of profit as a
So I think that's the problem is that it's the combo of these things that makes it feel like everyone's just like, what? It's one thing if you're like, hey, if let's say we owned 2 studios, okay, just we have 2 studios underneath the Butterscotch Shenanigans belt, and one of them is like just hasn't been able to do anything. It doesn't seem like it's going to be able to do anything, and you close it because we're bleeding cash and the whole operation's about to die now at this point. You know, okay, sure, I could. Sure, there's some business stuff there, but if
you got to do it, survive.
What else are we going to do? Yeah,
but if you're like, hey, we posted record earnings. And
you guys did great. You guys were a big part of that. You know, great job.
Yeah, and then but get fucked though. It's just
go home.
I think that's it's the combination of like seeing these shareholder calls or these more like almost like by the numbers business things contrasted with these constant closures in the space and the lack of funding that's available now in space and all this other stuff drying up and being like,
again, like
what's happening?
Ethics and morality don't come into it, right? It's just like I was saying earlier, in the long term, if they believe that they can still get all the high quality games they want on their platforms without doing this, without hiring all these developers and stuff, then they'll just fire them, right? Like it's just money in, money out. Checking boxes on a balance sheet.
They shouldn't come into it. It's just the fact that they.
That's just what's happening. Yeah. So you know, it's wild.
It reminds me of one of my most hated phrases of all time, which is it's just business. It's
not personal.
Yeah, it's not personal. It's just
I'm a person.
Yeah, exactly. Like
it's personal.
Business is a human endeavor. Everything people do is a human endeavor. And the moment you're like, oh, it's just business, you know.
Well, I think it's actually a useful thing to keep in mind when you are the small person dealing with a large entity in terms of.
But I'm saying when somebody says it to you because of what they did to you, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
But, well, I mean, the thing is, like,
not just business. It's
yeah. But like we're talking about, in some cases, you have to make hard choices. You have to let people go to save the company or because something is literally not working, right? You can't just keep.
But you should be adding more people about that, and you should feel guilty about it.
It's never good.
It's not good. Even if you have like let's say you got an employee who truly just sucks, right? And you're like, well, I got to fire this person because they're just a terrible employee, right?
Or they are a Nazi or something.
Well, then I would feel better.
Turns out,
that
would feel bad about that one.
But if it's an otherwise like perfectly good, amicable person, you know, who just like can't do the work they need to do, so you got to fire him. Like that simultaneously can be true that you need to do that because you are running a business and the rest of the business depends on everybody actually being successful, right? But you also should feel terrible about that on a personal level, right? And the moment you don't, because you're like, it's just business, that's when you create all these fucking bullshit problems that we have to deal with because you're just stripping all the humanity out of everything.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
Now, we were going to get into some questions, but
But we
pretty much
didn't.
out of time. But there's one thing that I want to mention, which is pretty cool. Our dad published a book.
Yeah.
Oh, is it out now?
It's out.
Yeah, it's out now.
So it came out on May 1st from Ice Cube Press in Iowa. I pre-ordered it and my copy arrived a couple of days ago. And so it's called Even So, Stories from an Overpopulated Farmhouse. So it's a memoir about his life growing up. And it is good.
It's very good.
I still haven't read it. I gotta
Yeah,
I
got it,
started
I think 2 weeks ago, maybe. I got one of the earlier pre-orders, I think. And I finished it. Diana read it also. And it's really good. It's a
Dad
good
mentioned,
fucking-
so the dads came to visit us a couple weekends ago. And so Dad, if you're listening, I'm going to call you out right now because you did say you were going to bring me a copy of the book. Because I was like, oh, should I go order it? And you're like, oh, no, I'm going to bring some copies this weekend. You did not bring any copies. So,
well, their publisher was a little late on like getting the copies printed.
I'm
and
not
shipped out,
even
I guess.
saying it's
So
anybody's fault.
That's just what happened.
It's just
you know?
what happened. And then, of
yeah,
course, I got
so-
ADHD, so I then totally forgot about it. So
Yeah, that does happen.
gotta go order my copy. Yep.
Yeah, I got it, and then I didn't get a chance to crack it open until like 2 days afterwards, and then
It's great.
like I had to kind of force myself to put it down. It's
How
very
much
funny.
of it? Yeah, how much of it is just the stories that we heard growing up? You know,
It's a lot of that. It's like it's mainly his childhood, just the focus, right?
Yeah.
So it's there's quite a few of those that we've heard, but then also quite a few other ones. They're the same kind of story, in a different way. Like this is just
but it's also
zany,
different in a book
insane.
context than just like being told.
It's great.
A story.
Yeah, but
It's really
it's very interesting because he was growing up as a gay kid in rural Iowa in the 1960s, in a extremely religious household, with not with a real bad father.
Yeah,
We'll just put it there.
villainous
You'll
dad.
find out. And with 9 brothers and sisters, and like what he went through to as like an extremely smart kid, to sort of like escape that farm and not kind of get sucked into it and have it kind of just like dismantle his life, and to get out of there and go to medical school and become a surgeon and build a life for himself. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a really good read. And I say that as like, I know that obviously I'm biased, right? Because, it's interesting for me inherently to just like read about my dad's life because he's my dad, right? But I have to think that like just the way that this is written, like I was just cracking up.
No, it's a very
some
good
of, like-
book. As a person who has
like
read
some of these
too
stories
many
and-
books, it is an exceptionally good
It's
read. Really
super good.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a good read, check that out. It's unfortunately not on Kindle or like there's no ebook version of it. It's only paperback. But yeah, you can get it on Amazon. So it's called Even So, and there's actually a lot of books called Even So. It turns out I found out.
it
So
seems like there
you'll
would
have
be.
you'll probably have to also put
Even
David
so,
Coster.
by David Coster, Coster.
Yeah. So check that out. And if you like it, give it a review. He's never published a book before, and he may never publish another one.
Yeah.
It's just something he had to get out into the world. So, congrats to our dad on
Absolutely.
achieving that. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's really, really dope. And if you have anything you want to tell us about your experience reading it, pop into our Discord. We have a little podcast channel there. Let us know, and we'll relay whatever good messages that you tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah, specifically. And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. We're getting up there. It's really cruising, and every wish list helps boost the game's visibility on the store and helps support it for when it launches. So we'd really appreciate that.
And we've got the
Thank you
demo
all for
coming
listening.
out, which I think is
It'll be the week after us.
is the week, so it'll happen before we record the next episode or put out the next
Yeah.
episode. So yeah, May 21st, demo's coming out. So make sure you go wish list the game and then give it a try and let us know what you think.
Give it a try. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.